And we'll go ahead and start with any questions you have.
I have a question, sir.
Okay.
Lab 19, the Nets immaculate statement. I was trying to figure it out, but I don't know what I'm doing wrong, though. It's mostly coming in error.
Well, let's see. What is lab 19?
20, sorry, 20.
Okay. What is lab 20?
An if-else statement on the net list.
Let me look it up. Okay. For this one, we're trying to find out the maximum number. Now, as I think I said in one other, there is a max function, but you can't use it in this. You're going to ask the user for 3 numbers. And you're not supposed to use ands and ors in this one. And what you're supposed to do is compare, say, 2 of the numbers. For example, if we check, if we've got, I'll call them A, B, and C. Check to see if, say, A is greater than B. Well, if A is greater than B, then we don't know if A is the biggest, but we certainly know that, that B is not. So then you'd have inside of that if, you would check to see if A was greater than C. If A is greater than C, you know that A is the largest number. If A is not greater than C, then you would need an else to check to see if, because you know that, say, C is bigger than A. In this case, actually, you would know that C is the biggest. Because A was greater than B. Well, no, actually, you wouldn't. You would. Wait, hold on. Yes, you would. You would know there. Then there would be another else under that one to go with the A greater than B. We know that A is not greater than B in this case. So then you might check to see if B is greater than C. And if B is greater than C, you know B is greater than A, then B is the biggest. Otherwise, you'll have another if or an else if. You'll need to ask, actually, I think I said not to use else ifs in it. You need to check C and A to see which is the biggest. So you'd have 2 sets of nested ifs. An if inside of the if, and then another if inside of the else. And the best way to figure out how to compare is to write it down on paper, and then with some sample numbers, and see how it works out with each of the 3 numbers the biggest in one of those 3 cases. And when I run it, I've got 3 different numbers I use in different combinations. Let's say I use 10, 20, 30, then I might use 30, 20, 10, then I might use 20, 30, 10, those different orders to see if all of them work. So testing, you have to check all of the possibilities. All right. Okay, other questions? Now, a lot of times as these programs get a little bit more complex, the way you need to work them out, or the best way to work them out, is sit there and do it on paper with sample data. Figure out what the steps are. Don't just start trying to write code. Figure out the steps.
Did you say that we can't use the and in that lab?
Not on that lab, no. If you could use ands, that makes it easy. See, normally we would have finished this lab before we got to and, but since timing's a little off, I think next year I'll put in something specifically to say no ands. But no, you do not want to use ands in that lab, because you want to see, the whole idea is to figure out how to do the nested ifs. And if you use ands, you don't need to nest them. Now, granted, ands would make it easier. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Perry.
Okay. All right. Any others? All right. The last thing we did last Wednesday's class, we were looking at the random function, and we had looked at doing random integers using the rand range. And the rand range, you give it a starting and an ending value, and just like the range command, it will start at the start value and go up to but not include the end if you give it 2 parameters. You can give it a single parameter and it just goes up to, starts at 0. So if you wanted to roll a dice, for example, in this case, you go 1 to 7, and that will give you a range of between 1 and 6. It's got a cousin, the rand int. I don't really use it. I use the rand range. But with the rand int, it goes up to and includes that stop value. You have 2 parameters, a start and a stop, and it goes up to and includes the stop value. With the random numbers in Python, it always, if you don't use a seed, it uses the current date and time. Virtually every other language, you need to seed it with something, and normally you would seed it with the current date and time. And so that is the random function, or rand int. There is a rand function, a random function, random.random, and that generates a random floating point number between 0 and 1. So if you need something, say a floating point number between 0 and 100, you would multiply that by 100. The last one we did, we said we wanted a number between 1 and 100. So you took that random value and multiplied it by 99 to give you a random floating point number between 0 and 99. Add 1 to it and gives you between 1 and 100. So that's the random numbers. Random numbers are used in a lot of things. Gamers, if you do game programming, random numbers are used extensively in game programming. It's used a lot in cryptography. So there is a lot of things that we use random numbers for. All right. Any questions on that?
Would you please leave this up while I'm actually type this in?
It is posted up on the share.
Okay, thank you, sir.
So it's already, all these files, unless I mess up and overwrite one, are posted.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay. All right, so functions. We've been using built-in functions. Since pretty much day one, print is a function. We've used the strip functions. We've used the random, the math functions. Those have all been part of Python. And we actually have used a user-defined function. The main function we've been using since before our extended spring break is actually a user-defined function. So when we start dealing with user-defined functions this week, we're really using something we've already been doing. When you create a function, it's DEF and then the name of the function. Just like I said with variables, you want to use variables that tell you what these numbers or what the variable does. You want to use function names that tell you something about the function. Now, we have been lazy in our examples and we've used XYZ. Some of you in your labs have just used XYZ or ABC. And in a few cases, it's got you in trouble because you didn't remember what X, Y, and Z were being used for. So we really should, again, name our variables something that makes sense. Functions the same way. I've written a function here called display something. Now, when you do your own functions, let me scroll this so I can get it a little higher. When you do your own functions, main, I didn't require it, but all functions you create, you have to comment. And the way you comment the function is right below it. If you do 3 apostrophes and press enter, PyCharm knows you're wanting to do a multi-line function or comment, and it knows because the line above it was a function name, a DEF and a function, that you want to comment the function. So one of the things it does is puts this colon return here. Later on, when we pass information to the function, it will actually put those variables. So inside of the comments, you want to say what this function will do. Notice it puts the word return between double colons. It's here if you are going to return a value to the function or to the place in the program that called the function. Here you would describe what is being returned. I'm not going to return anything in this function, so I'll put a none there. But all of your user-defined functions except main, I require you to have this function or this comment format. This is well known, and this is part of the pip format that they want. So my display something function, I'm just going to do a simple print in this one. I'll say hello from the function. And let's say that's my whole function. The last thing in my function should be a return statement. And I'm not actually returning anything, so I can leave it blank just as return. If I was going to return or send something back the way, for example, the math functions do, I would need to put that variable or whatever I'm returning there. In Python, if you don't put the return in, it's going to assume a return. This is not true in every language, and it's bad programming etiquette. So you should always have a return, one or more returns in your function. Now, to call the function, we're not returning anything, so you just use the function name. Display something. And that's all it takes to call a function. Whenever it sees that, it's going to go to the function and execute all the code in the function and then return to that line. I'm going to just stick a print here. Say in main. And I'm going to call display something a second time. And then I'm going to do another print. Still in main. So you can see what happens. So when I run this, the main here says start at the main function. So it comes up to the main function. It runs display something. So it'll come down here to this function. It will do hello from a function. It comes back. The next line is this print in main. Then it calls that function again. So it'll come back down, execute the function over again, say hello from a function, and then come back and do this print. Now, obviously, this is not doing very much, and you could have just said hello from a function in main, but that's not what we're trying to illustrate. You want to do functions or create functions to break down a complex problem into simpler things. So if you got a big problem, breaking into simpler things, and or if you've got to do the same thing over and over again in multiple places in your program, that's where you want to do a function. So I'm going to run this, and there's that hello from a function. When it executed this, display something. Here's my in main. Came back, did this one. Then it's going to call the function again. So it does the hello from a function, comes back and does the still in main. Now I'm going to go ahead and put a couple of breakpoints in here. And I'll put another breakpoint before this return. And now it's sitting there, it's at display something. There's nothing showing on the console yet. I'll tell it to go on. So now it's gone into the function. So it's inside the function. If I look at my console, it has printed hello from a function. It's at this return. So it's going to return back to this line and then execute the next line. So it's paused just before the print in main. Now it'll do the print in main, or in main, where it prints the words in main. Now it's getting ready to call display something again. So it pops down in, did the hello from a function again, pops up, back up to the line after where the function was called. So, but that's the basics of creating a function. You do a define of the function, give it a name.
I have a question.
Okay.
I tried the same thing, but it didn't work.
Well, I can't see your code, so I don't know what you did wrong. You probably got a typo in there. What error message is it giving?
It says the input automatically syntax error, invalid syntax where the word input is.
Have you? I've not got input. I've not got the word input in here.
Import, sorry, import.
Import. What have you got after import?
Period, period, period. 3 periods.
Okay, hit the little down arrow button to expand it. Something's a problem there. You don't need any imports actually in this one. This is just left over from the last stuff.
So erase it?
You can erase it.
Okay, erasing it now.
Other questions?
Yeah, I have one.
Okay.
When you have multiple functions or defined functions, does it matter what order they're in?
That is a good question, and that means you have programmed in another language.
Sorry about that.
No, that's good. That's good. Some languages, the order the functions appear matters. In Python, it doesn't. I've read that there are a couple of special cases where it does, but in general, Python doesn't care what order the functions appear. But if you program, for example, in C++ or C, if you call a function before it's been defined, it won't work. But Python, the way the Python interpreter parses it, I've never ran into that problem. And all I've read is there are a couple of really weird conditions, and don't ask me what they were. I didn't even delve into it, where something can go wrong. But yes, you can do them in any order. Okay, other questions? Now, we called that function, and we didn't pass anything. This display something, when we did it there, we just displayed the same thing every time. Now think about whenever most of the functions we've used, even the print function, you put something in the parentheses. When you put something in the parentheses, you're passing it what we'll call a parameter. You pass it a parameter. When you pass a parameter, you give it a value or you copy something into the function for it to work on. So I'm gonna.
Mr. Perry,
Yes.
let's see. PyCharm just clicked off. Hang on, I gotta get back on. Wait 1 second. Well, never mind. Just go ahead and I'll follow, catch up when it gets there.
Okay. So we're gonna change this a little bit. I'm gonna go ahead and just hard code in a name. And I'm going to change this to the function here. Instead of display something, I'll say display name. And in the function, I'm going to put a variable called a name. Okay. So I'm going to pass it a name. So that will be what it will receive when I call the function. Now, when I put my little comment thing in here now, notice in addition to the return, it pre-fills that PARAM, short for parameter, a name. And I'm still going to not return anything. For my comment, I'll just say display a name that is passed. So make sure I get my comments in. Now, when I call the function, notice right now, well, the curly lines, I don't have a function anymore called something. So change that to name. I've still got a problem. If I try to run it now, it's expecting me to pass it a name. So I've got to pass it a name. What we're going to just do is print the words hello and whatever name we pass it. So in the function, I'm going to pass it name. And name the first time is Billy Bob. So I'm going to pass it a variable. The second time I call it, I'm going to pass it a string. So when I run it this time, the first time it calls display name, it's going to pass it Billy Bob, or the variable name, and it should print hello Billy Bob. Come back to main, then call the function and pass it Silly Sally and say hello Silly Sally.
Do you need an F in line 27 in front of hello?
Do what?
Do you need an F in line 27 in front of hello? for your formatting.
Oh, yes, I do. Yeah. I would have gotten an error. Can't talk. I'm not good at talking and typing at the same time, as you guys well know. So here it says, hello, Billy Bob. Then it back to the main, then hello, Silly Sally. When it calls the function, it says go down to the function and pass it the parameter name, which in this case is a variable. Notice the variable name and the variable a name are different. They do not have to be, and usually are not, because I don't know what I'm going to call this with. I might have boy's name, girl's name, different variables that I pass it, but it always puts it into a variable here called a name. I can do anything with that variable a name I want. So I just printed it. Let's say a name is equal a name dot to upper. When I run it this time, or is it to upper a name? Forget which ones are methods sometimes.
You don't like that either.
Doesn't like that either. Oh, it's just upper, isn't it?
A name upper.
A name. Yeah, upper. To upper is C++. Sometimes the machine is a little bit slow when I'm streaming, so there we go. So notice it makes Billy, Bob, and Sally uppercase when it prints it. Now, did it change name? Did it
No.
change? It changed a name to an uppercase. Did it change name?
No.
No. And if I print name here, eventually when it runs, there we go. Billy Bob's still in the same case I put it in. And even if I had used a name here, it would not have changed the original. The variable name is local or just as in main, and a name is in display name. In fact, if I were to try to print in main or do anything with in main, a name, I've got the little red squiggly because it doesn't exist. Once I leave display name, any variables that I created are gone. They cease to exist. Once I exit, once I hit this return, a name as a variable ceases to exist. It is considered, or what we say is local to that function. Any variables you create in a function cease to exist once you leave that function. Okay? Now let's change this a little bit. And this time I want to return something. I'm going to return a name. So that variable a name, whatever its contents is, I'm going to return it. So I need to change up here. I also want to tell it what I'm returning in my comments to keep my comments correct. But if I want to do anything with that value I return, I have to say something like our name, which is I'm going to use for return name, equal display name. And then I'm going to go ahead and print that. Now, I don't have to do anything with it. In this case, I want to. But here, if I don't want to do anything with Silly Sally, I won't put anything here, and that returned value is just lost. But it doesn't make sense to do that. So now it's going to return the name in uppercase because I made it uppercase. Still going to print the hello, but then it's going to print the names in uppercase after it returns. So I've done, here is in the function, the hello Billy Bob. Now it returned Billy Bob in uppercase here. So the value it returned is set equal to what's on the left, the R name. And then the next line prints Billy Bob in main. Then we call it with Silly Sally. It again converts it in the function to uppercase, sends it back, returns Silly Sally for this. And so I've got the assignment operator. So our name is going to end up with Silly Sally in all uppercase. So I can return a value that way by putting return, and then the variable I want to return. In this case, I'm returning the name. It could be the results of a calculation. Questions there? Well, let's do another one. This time, let's create a function, define the function, call it cube, and I'm going to pass it a number, just call it NUM. So I'm going to cube a number. I'm going to return cube, and I could in there also give more of a description. So cube is going to equal num times num times num. Yes, I could go pull out the power function and all, but I don't need to here. And I'm going to return cube. So I'm going to pass it a number. It's going to cube it and return the cube of it. And I could change it and ask for a number. Actually, let's do that. And let's let them enter a float. And to call it, it's again the name of the function. Well, I need to store it somewhere, or at least if I want to store it, cubed equal cube of num. Oh, not num, number. So tell it to print it. So now I'm going to ask the user to enter a number. They're going to enter a number. I'm going to call cube, come down here and cube the number, return it to a variable called cubed, and then just output those values. So 2.4 cubed is 13.8. And if we want to run it with something we know, if I go down to the bottom, 3 cubed is 27, so I know that's right. And again, I could call this function several times. So this time I'll say cubed, but I'm going to pass it cubed. Now here, I got a problem in this print is I lose the original value of cubed if I call this cubed when it comes back. So I'll call this cubed 1. Okay, and 3 cubed is 27. And now I've got those backwards. I should have had cubed here and cubed 1 here. And so 27 cubed is 19,683. Okay. So I can call it and pass it different values, and every time I call it, it's going to do that function. Now again, this is a fairly simple function, and you might say, well, it'd be just as easy to run that calculation each time in it. But one, if every time you have to redo you use the same calculation over and over again, you're more likely to make a mistake with it. But also, if this was a more complex operation, or we were using it throughout the program, it would make sense to put it in a function. You put things in a function like this that you're going to use over and over again, less likely to make a mistake. Of course, if you make a mistake in the function, it's wrong all the way through the program anyway. So, questions about passing a single parameter to a function and returning a value?
Can the parameter have a default value just in case the user does not put a value in?
Yes, you can. We will probably get to that in a day or two. But yes, you can set defaults. This time, I'm going to pass it two parameters. And I'll call this function info. I'm going to pass it a name and an age. And we're going to go back to something simple. Not none. Where all we're going to do is print what's passed just so you can see how that works. So I'm just going to print that whoever it is 6 years old. Actually, I'm going to leave the return out just so you can see it does work without the return. I do not recommend it, and if you are returning a value, you have to have the return. And I'm going to, well, let's just use age. Use, in this case, the same variable name. So when you define the function with multiple parameters, when you define a function with multiple parameters, you separate them by commas. Separate them by commas. When you call them, you give them the values separated by commas. So I can pass it 2, 3, 4. I can pass it as much information as I need to. So I can pass it 2, 3, 4, 5, hundreds of parameters. Not that you would probably get that straight. So when I run it now, it says George is 33 years old. It passed it both of these parameters. It passed it George, and it passed 33, and then used it in the function. Any questions there with two parameters?
But
Okay. Todd had asked about a default value. We'll go ahead and do one here. You can set a default value saying if the user doesn't pass that information, use this value. Under age, if I say age equal 42, when I run it now, I'm passing it with this info, I'm passing it George and 33, so it doesn't affect it. That default value doesn't matter. But what if I called info again, and this time I only pass it Mary? So only pass it the one value. What's it going to do? It says Mary is 42 years old. If I call the function and it's looking for, in this case, two parameters, and I don't supply the second one, but I do have a default value here, then it will use that default value. Well, what if I didn't give it that default value? What would it do? Well, it gives you an error saying missing one required positional argument, age. What it's saying is, you didn't send me an age. I was expecting it. So since I don't have a default value, I'm going to have an error. But if I've got that default value, doesn't matter. Now, here's where you've got to be careful. I could even give it a default name. And I could call info with no parameters. And it says Ricky is 42 years old. Because I gave defaults in both of those, then I don't have to give it any parameters. But can I do this? Well, you see the red squiggly, so you're probably guessing no. And I get a non-default argument. Well, if I'm going to have a default for the first parameter, I must have a default for every parameter. I can have variables that do not have defaults, 1, 2, 3, 4, but once I start giving a default, every variable after that, every parameter after that has to have a default value. So once I decided that the name needed a default, I had to have a default age. There is no way I can call based on what we've done so far and just supply the age. Now, there is actually a way of doing it, but that's not anything we want to get into tonight. We want you to see how we call a function, how we define it, how we can return values. Any questions there? Okay. So that's the beginning of functions. What we'll be looking at next time is how we pass a list to a function and how we can return more than one value. Those of you that have worked in another language know that most languages you cannot return more than one value. Well, Python is a little different. I can actually return multiple values in Python. And so we'll see how to do that next. But this is, I think that we've been going on about 45 minutes. So I think that's enough for one setting. Any questions? Once you get to learn or get to using functions, you really will only want to use them wherever you can.
Oh, excuse me, Mr. Perry.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm actually listening to what you were saying. My computer got froze. I'm actually so I had to click it on and click it back off, on, click off. I had to click it off and back on to get back on to actually the video. So I kind of missed some stuff.
Well, you can watch the video. I'll get it posted probably in the morning because it takes it a little time to process, and I will get the examples posted tonight.
Understood. Thank you, sir.
No. Okay. All right. Somebody else want to ask something or? Okay.
To this question, it could be simple yes or no. Does Python have global variables?
Yes and no. Yes, they have them. If I catch you using them, I will give you a 0 unless you can prove to me that was the only way to do things.
Okay.
Global variables are frowned upon. Yeah. I actually had my Fortran teacher basically set that rule in place, and I felt that he must have known what he was doing, because he had been writing Fortran since they invented it. And actually, you'll probably find that in most programming languages you have global variables, but they are frowned upon using them in most cases. There are some times when you have to, but most of the time it's not a smart idea.
I was just thinking about those that's not aware of it and might position a variable in the wrong place.
Yeah. Yeah, do not use global variables. Anything else? Okay. Now, read the assignments carefully, folks, because sometimes it's you know, if you miss a line and you forget something. All right, I'll go ahead and stop the sharing now, or the recording, and stop my sharing. And if nobody has anything, I'll once I stop recording, I'll